Good morning and welcome back to the Planet Doug podcast. This could be a pretty confusing Planet Doug podcast because in my brain, I barely know where I am and what I'm doing. And if I'm that confused, it could be that people out there who might be following my small adventures might be equally confused. But I have some notes here, and maybe everything will start to make sense as I talk. So where am I? I am in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and I'm back at the J Hotel Masjid, India. And I've been staying at this hotel for the last year or 2 years, I think, since I've been coming in and out of KL, just because I discovered this hotel that has single rooms, which brings the price down. And so the rooms are very basic. Comfortable but basic, no windows, it's very small, single room, that kind of thing. But it just seems to be the best value in terms of what you get for your money here in Kuala Lumpur. So I keep coming back here. I like being near Masjid Jamak LRT MRT station. That makes it very convenient. I like being right downtown. So yeah, it works out basically. But I keep shooting myself in the foot because previous to this I was in Sumatra in Indonesia, and my tourist visa expired right on the first day of Chinese New Year. And that's always a very difficult time to do anything because government offices closed, everything closes, and hotels suddenly book up and double their prices, and airfares go up, and planes are booked out. It's just a very busy time. For me personally, the very worst time to travel, but I didn't have a choice. Luckily, I was in Tanjung Balai, which has a ferry that goes to Malaysia, so I didn't have to worry about airfares and things like that if I didn't want to. And then all I did was book a ticket on the ferry that went from Tanjung Balai back to Port Dickson. And it turned out I got quite lucky there because when I went to book my ticket on the ferry, I was looking at various dates. I could go on a Thursday, a Friday, a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I thought I could pick any one of those days, but it turns out even the ferry company shut down for Chinese New Year. So, in fact, there were no boats on most of those days, and I managed to get a seat on their very last boat before they closed for the holidays. And I had no idea that Chinese New Year would affect the boat schedule as well. So anyway, I got out just in time, just before my visa expired. And then I came here, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I hadn't even booked a hotel room in advance because I didn't know what I was going to do in Malaysia, and I was just leaving my plans open. And then it just turned out that a friend of mine picked me up in Port Dickson, KY, and he drove me right to Kuala Lumpur. I didn't have plans to come to KL, but since he had a car and he was there and he was driving to KL, I thought, oh, okay. So I just hopped in the car and away we went. So then along the way, I booked a room here, a single room. But then again, because it was Chinese New Year, the hotel was fully booked over and over. And if you didn't book a room far enough in advance, the room would be booked out from under you. So anyway, I had a single room. That single room turned out not to be a very good room. The air conditioner didn't work and there were some issues. So I moved to another single room, and that was a much better room. But then when I tried to rebook that room to stay longer, I couldn't. All the single rooms were taken. So then I had no choice but to upgrade to a double room, which is where I am now. And now that the Chinese New Year holidays are over, smooth sailing. Whenever my reservation expires and I want to stay longer, I can just rebook a double room. They tend to have a lot of double rooms available. The single rooms are popular because they're cheaper and people are always looking for single rooms and they don't exist in most hotels. But I thought, now that I'm in a double room, I'll just stay in the double room and I'll just keep rebooking it as needed. But I did not count on Thaipusam, the very popular, very large, a very significant, that's the word I'm looking for, a significant holiday in the Hindu calendar, particularly for Tamil people. And a lot of the people, the Indian people here in Malaysia, their history goes back to Tamil Nadu. That's the part of India they came from. So here in Kuala Lumpur, they follow Tamil traditions and culture. And Thaipusam is a significant holiday for them. And this is the Thaipusam weekend. I believe Thaipusam itself is on Tuesday, I think. The big ceremony at Batu Caves, that falls on February 11th this year. And they're expecting over 1 million people at Batu Caves. Who knows how many people are going to show up. It's a big deal, is what I'm saying. So, and it turns out someone here was telling me that even here, my neighborhood is a Little India in Kuala Lumpur, but it's actually a Muslim Little India. But even so, Thaipusam is being celebrated here as well, and someone was just telling me that right across the street from my hotel, there's going to be a big festival, a big thing going on for Thaipusam right here. So this hotel, I thought, would have lots and lots of rooms available because Chinese New Year is over. Turns out they were like booked out for this weekend because it's Thaipusam. And luckily I managed to find a single room, their last remaining room, and I booked the single room, which means, again, this morning, I'm probably going to have to move because someone booked this double room out from under me. So I'm going to have to move from this double down to a single. And anyway, so it's just, my life is in total chaos from every perspective right now. And I was just chatting with someone here at the hotel, and they says, oh, give me a minute. He's going to look at the bookings, and maybe he can do some booking wizardry and allow me, even though I booked a single, they may let me just stay here in this double. So I may not have to move. I mean, I don't mind being in a single, being in a double. It's all the same to me, basically. But if I have to move to a new room, then of course I have to start packing up, and then I have to carry all my stuff to a new room, and anyway. So I'm sitting here on pins and needles, not sure whether I can stay in this room or not. Technology is also complicated because since I returned to Kuala Lumpur, I've been reunited with a backpack that I leave here in storage. I've sort of been switching between my bicycle gear and my backpack gear. And I took my bicycle to Sumatra, which means I left my backpack here. And had it been the other way around, had I gone to Sumatra with my backpack, I would have left my bicycle here. But either way, I left some items in storage here in Kuala Lumpur, again with my friend KY. And I thought he had the backpack in Port Dickson. But it turned out he had it here at his house in Kuala Lumpur. And then when I moved into this hotel, he brought the backpack over because, again, my life of technology is so different. All of my various smartphones have been banned in Indonesia because of the whole customs registration problem. So I'm pretty sure when I go back to Sumatra, even though I have 3 smartphones, none of them will work in Indonesia anymore. I have one phone that I was using on my last trip, and it was working. I managed to get a customs registration extension on this one, but I think that extension is going to expire. And when I get back to Sumatra, this phone will be blocked, and this phone will be blocked, and my third phone will also be blocked. So I thought, oh, I have other phones. Like, these are my new phones. These are my good ones that I'm using. But I also had a couple of old phones that they're so old you can't really do anything with them. You can't even give them away because they're just too outdated. Nobody even wants them anymore. You certainly can't sell them. But I thought, well, what I can do is take one of my old, outdated phones, which have never been to Indonesia, bring them there, and then I can register, I can get a SIM card for one of my old phones, use it as a hotspot to power one of my good phones. And those old phones are all in my backpack. So when I got the backpack, I went rummaging around and I pulled out my old phones. I had a Xiaomi Redmi 4 Prime, and that was the one I had my eye on. I was actually planning on giving that one to a friend of mine here who could use an extra phone. And I thought, and I said to her, yeah, I've got this Xiaomi phone that it's older, but it works fine. I can just pass it on to you. But then when I pulled it out of my backpack, the battery doesn't work anymore. I guess it's been unused for so long that it won't charge. And if you do manage to get it to charge up, it won't hold the charge. You get like 10 minutes out of it and the phone shuts down. So that battery is junk. But I do have a tiny Apple iPhone, an iPhone SE. Beautiful little device. It is just absolutely gorgeous. And I've used this as a music player in the past. I've never put a SIM card in it. I've never used it as a real phone. And this one is just as old as my Android phones, but maybe there's something magical about iPhones after all, because once I charge this up, the battery lasts, like if I don't use it, like since I dug it out of my backpack, I just plugged it in, charged it up, it charged absolutely fine. And then I wasn't using it, but day after day after day went by, and the battery level drops almost negligibly. I don't know how long I've had it. I haven't turned it off at all. I've just charged it up and turned it on, and it would just, I don't know, it's probably been 3 days, and the battery is still at like 60, 70% power. And I've never used any kind of an iPhone with a SIM card. I don't know how they work. I don't know anything about them. I don't know about using it as a hotspot. All of my apps are Android, Google-based, Windows-based technology. So I wouldn't use any of the Apple ecosystem. But I'm hoping, so I'm going to bring this one to Sumatra when I go back and if I need to, put a SIM card in here, put data on here, and then I can run my other phones from a Wi-Fi hotspot. Indonesia makes life very complicated for me. So anyway, so that's one way my life of technology is more complicated. And since I had my backpack here, I dug out my Olympus camera. I have an Olympus OMD EM5 Mark II, and I'm actually filming this on my Olympus right now. And yeah, it's an amazing camera. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about cameras right now. To be honest, I'm perfectly happy with the camera setup that I have. When I was in Sumatra, I have a GoPro Hero 12. That's my main camera. And I have a GoPro Hero 9, my secondary camera. So I might hold my Hero 12 in my hand, and then I have the 9 on a chest harness. So I've got the two different perspectives, or I might have the two of them mounted on my bike, each one pointing in a different direction. And I'm perfectly happy with that. And then I have the 360 camera, the Insta360 X3. So the combination of those three cameras, three action cameras basically, is all I need in life. But then as soon as you try to shoot like a podcast video like this one, or any kind of a specialty video, then something like a GoPro doesn't cut it anymore. And then when I turn to my Olympus, I remember, it's like, I love a traditional camera. The form factor, the interchangeable lenses, so much better in low light, better image quality. And if you have a certain lens, of course, now you've got a zoom telephoto capability. Sort of like, yeah, that's pretty sweet to have a real camera. You can convince yourself that if you want to travel lightweight and you're just a casual YouTuber like me, you don't need a Sony A7S III that costs $3,000, $4,000 with a lens. I mean, it looks good, but you don't need it. There are tons and tons of very popular, famous YouTubers who all they use is the Sony XDR 3000. The FDR X3000. One of the oldest Sony cameras you can buy, who had no bells and whistles at all, and they get along just fine with that. So you don't need big fancy cameras. But I don't know, once you start playing around with something like this Olympus, which is very small and lightweight, a micro four thirds system, and right now I'm shooting with a 12 millimeter lens, beautiful lens. It's very lightweight, and yeah, it's just nice to have. So that's what I'm shooting with right now. But I haven't been using it for a while, so I have to refresh my memory about how it works and doing all of the setup for microphones and audio levels and autofocus. And because autofocus is a big problem with this camera when it comes to video. I think it should be fine now. I have it set up on continuous autofocus with tracking, and it actually has a little green box right over my face. And with the 12 millimeter Olympus, that tracking works really well. So like I can see, even if I lean over to the side, that little green box is tracking me. And I think if I hold up my cup of coffee, it will switch to my coffee. Yeah, now it's focusing on my coffee or my arm or something like that. Now, yeah, okay, now it went back to my face again. So if you're sitting stationary like this, I could even manually focus to get my face in focus, and I don't even need autofocus at all. But that's hard to do when you're by yourself. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm several feet away from the camera, so how do I focus it manually on me? Because I can't reach the camera to focus. I can't. Anyway, I need a second person behind the camera to sort of look through it and, okay, focus on me. Okay, now it's in focus, and now we leave it there. But if you're only one person, how do you ever use manual focus? So anyway, I still have it on continuous autofocus. And I'm not shopping around for a new camera. I hardly need a new camera in my life. But I'm interested in cameras in general. I'm a gearhead, I suppose. So yesterday I found myself at the Mega Mall, Kuala Lumpur's, the Mid-Valley Mega Mall. I went down there because I was more technology stories. I was looking for a new mouse, and I'll talk about the mouse in a minute. So I went there to buy a mouse because this mouse is broken. So I went down there, and I went to Thunder Match, a big electronics mega store, to buy a Logitech mouse. I was just going to buy like the cheapest mouse I could find. And then right across the hall from it was a Sony store. And I love going into any camera stores and just picking up all the cameras and playing around with them. And of course I was mainly looking at their vlogging cameras, because they're big ones like the Sony, the one I just mentioned, I forget the name of it now, I can't think of it. Anyway, they're big full frame systems. They're not meant for me, but they do have what they call the ZV series, which is their vlogging cameras, and this is their brochure from it. So ages ago they came out with the ZV1 to a lot of hype. It was going to be their vlogging camera, and it turned out to be kind of it didn't work as a vlogging camera for me because the lens was too narrow. I see here the widest is like 24 millimeters. If you're talking about 35 millimeter equivalency, it's got a 24 millimeter lens, which is the widest it can go. And that means when you're holding the camera in front of you to vlog, it's like really tight on your face. And I like this perspective. I want a tiny head and I want lots of background, especially if you're outside walking around. You want people to see what's around you, and you don't want the camera just like right in your face and all you see is the vlogger's giant head filling the whole screen. You want a wide lens. So this drives me crazy. Sony did a giant, massive marketing campaign, the ZV1, the ultimate vlogging camera. And to me, camera companies are generally run by non-vloggers. I was going to say they're generally run by idiots, because from my point of view, they never ever get it right. And it does not seem that complicated to me. It's pretty easy to design a vlogging camera. I could sit down with a pad of paper and a pen right now. I could write down what the specs should be. It would be so easy. These are the features a vlogger needs. List of 10 items, done. And yet these camera companies like Sony have been working on it for a decade, and they still haven't even figured out the basics yet. Even a GoPro is a better vlogging camera than the ZV1. So it's insane. So anyway, the ZV1 came out, and it wasn't wide enough, and the stabilization wasn't good enough. So when you're walking around, the video still shakes and vibrates and bounces around. So then they came out with the ZV1 Mark II, and they made an attempt to make it better, so hats off to them. They changed the lens to it says here, 18 millimeters to 50 millimeters zoom. So they went from 24 down to 18. And 18 is like right on the edge. I can just about get away with it. But 18 is still not wide enough for me. I want even wider than 18. And then the stabilization didn't seem good enough. And then when you have to turn on active electronic stabilization, and the way electronic stabilization works, it has to crop in on the image. So even if it's just barely wide enough, like right here, now you turn on stabilization, you're back here again. So again, it is not a good, at least that's what I thought, it is not a good vlogging camera. Not wide enough, stabilization is not good enough. Those two basic items. But what I've learned in my lifetime is that you can watch YouTube review videos as much as you want, and that is no substitution for trying the camera yourself. You learn a lot by picking up a camera. And then when I popped into the Sony store, and I've gone in there many times in the past, and I've picked up the ZV-1, the ZV-1 Mark II, the ZV-E10, the ZV-E10 Mark II, all their vlogging cameras. I've picked them all up and played around with them, but for some reason, I guess I'm way too polite. It never even occurred to me that I could turn them on. I just sort of look at them and but I never actually turn them on and use them and play around with them. I feel like you're not allowed to do that or something. But anyway, this time, I don't know, I was just feeling more energetic. And I hit the power button on the ZV-1 Mark II, and it turned on, the battery had a charge, and I got to play around with it. And to be honest, it says it's 18 millimeters, but it's wider than that. I swear it's way wider than 18 millimeters. Because I was holding it in my hand. I didn't even have it on a selfie stick. I just had it in my hand, and I'm holding it like this in front of me. And I was like, whoa, that is wide. It's like, how in the world can that be wide? There's no way that's 18 millimeters. Anyway, it looked wide enough, which surprised me. And the lightness of it, how small and light it was, I thought, wow, that could be a handy little camera. I'm impressed with that. I was like holding it and using it. It was more impressive to me than when I look at it in reviews. But the key factor would be stabilization. So I haven't often followed my own rule, but one rule to follow really is before you buy anything, you have to try it. So before I would think about trying to get a new camera thinking, oh, this is going to be a great camera, you got to go borrow one from a friend and then take it out for a couple of days and actually film with it. That's the only way to know for sure. And you have to do that before you part with your cold hard cash. So, but anyway, it was more promising than I expected to actually play around with it. I don't like Sony cameras, to be honest. The price of them, they're really expensive, and when you pick them up, they feel cheap. They feel flimsy. The controls feel plasticky, and there's play in them, and the menu system, everything about it is just icky. I mean, they get really good image quality, amazing autofocus, probably the best in the industry. They know what they're doing when it comes to that. But when you pick up the camera, it's like, what? I'm going to give you $800 for this little plasticky piece of junk? It doesn't feel premium to me at all. And then, for example, if you pick up this Olympus OMD EM5, they feel premium. You pick that up and it's like, okay, this is a beautifully machined, beautifully engineered, beautifully designed camera. And you really feel the difference in terms of the way the buttons feel, the placement of everything, when you manipulate a button or a knob, everything about it is incredible. And Sony's just kind of feel icky and plasticky. At least the lower ones. Maybe when you get up into the $3,000, $4,000 cameras, I'm sure they feel premium. But their vlogging cameras, to me, don't feel premium at all. But in terms of the width, it was much wider than I expected. And while I was there, a sales guy came over to talk to me, and I usually tell them, I'm cool. I don't really need any help. I often know more about the camera than they do in terms of from a specific vlogging point of view. I don't really need their help to understand the camera. But in this case, I guess I was in a really good mood. I was just feeling chatty, and I just started chatting with the guy, and I told him who I was and my needs and the whole vlogging story. And then I thought, well, since the guy's here, I asked him, hey, can you go behind the counter and get one of the ZV-E10s for me, the Mark II and the Mark I? Can I hold those? Because they were behind the counter, the new ones, and on display, and I didn't want to damage them. It's like, ooh, hold on to them. But I thought, it's his job to sell me a camera. So I asked him, hey, can I try out one of those? And he gave me the, originally was the ZV E10, the first generation. And when I picked it up, I was kind of surprised. I just went on and on about how cheap Sony cameras feel. But the E10 was like, wow, that was like a metal chassis. It felt solid and felt kind of premium. And it had it had a 16, I don't know if that one did, maybe the Mark II did. But anyway, I played around with the Mark I, and it was actually heavier and more solid than I expected. And I thought, oh, I thought they were lighter than this. And he says, oh no, that's the Mark II. He said, that's the Mark I, the original, and it has the metal body. And the feedback Sony got from vloggers was, yeah, it's a bit heavy. So then they went with the Mark II. They turned it into a plasticky camera, and it's much lighter. So he gave me the Mark II, and it had the kit lens on it, which is 16 to 50, or 16 to 35. I think 16 to 50, does it say? I don't know if it has the kit lens on here. Yeah, the lens. 16 to 50. So 16 millimeter at its widest. And the first one that I tried, the ZV-1, it had 18 at the widest. And 18 struck me as really wide. So I thought, well, this one is 16. It should be even wider. And I was like, I had no idea these Sony lenses were so wide. So he gave me the ZV-E10 Mark II, turned it on. I had it at 16 millimeters, and I held it out, and it was really tight. And I thought, what the heck? So something really weird is going on right now, because I looked at the 16 millimeter, and I thought, yeah, I can't use that. It's too narrow. The field of view is too narrow. That's what I was expecting. And the guy, he knew what I was talking about. This sales clerk, he was knowledgeable. And he says, yeah, anyone who comes in here who describes themselves as a YouTuber or a vlogger, they don't get the kit lens. They all tell me the same thing. 16 millimeter, that lens is too tight. So they get the 10 millimeter. So like 10 to 18. There's some very famous Sony lenses in the 10 to 18 range. And they want to get down to 10 millimeters. Now we're talking this wide. Or wider than this. It should be wider. But anyway, but then again, I had just tried the other camera, the ZV-1, and it had 18 millimeters, and yet the 18 millimeters was much wider than the 16 millimeter on a different camera. So there's something weird going on there. I'm going to have to revisit a Sony store just to figure out what's going on. But anyway, this was all just for fun. I have zero intention of trying to get my hands on a ZV-1 Mark II. I wouldn't mind trying one out just to satisfy my curiosity about the stabilization. That's the big problem with that camera, the stabilization. And the only way to know for sure is to walk around with it, film for a couple of hours, edit the video, and look at it, and then you see all the jittery and the shakiness and whatnot. Oh man, I'm such a dummy. Anyway, one issue with the Olympus camera, it does seem to have a recording limit per file. So you can't just hit the record button and then just talk and talk and talk and talk. It reaches a time limit, and then it turns off, and then you have to restart it. So that just happened now, and I just restarted the camera. But while I was restarting the camera, the light bulb finally went off. Where's my light bulb? The light bulb finally went off. I'm such a dummy. I know these things, but in the heat of the moment, you're in the camera store, you're picking things up, and you're not thinking clearly. The ZV-E10 has a different sensor, an APS-C sensor. And of course, the ZV-1 has a 1-inch sensor. So when you list the lens sizes, the focal length, you use a different scale. I'm such a dummy. So on the ZV-E10, they had a 16 to 50 millimeter lens. So I thought, oh, 16 millimeters, that's wider than 18. But it's an APS-C sensor, so it has a 1.5 times crop on it. So it really, I'm thinking in 35 millimeter terms. If you don't know what any of this means, yeah, don't worry about it. But I mean, I should have known this right from the start. I should have figured this out when I was in the store. But basically, if you want a consistent comparison, what you have to do with an APS-C lens is multiply it by 1.5. So if it is 16 millimeters, you actually have to add 8 to it. Because 16, 1.5 is 24. So in 35 millimeter terms, it's a 24 millimeter lens, not 16. It's like, yes, 24. That's too narrow. And the ZV-1 Mark II as an 18 millimeter lens on a 1-inch sensor, I think that number they're giving us, yes, that is a 35 millimeter equivalent. And if I want the 35 millimeter equivalent for the ZV-E10, I have to multiply it by 1.5. So comparing them, the ZV-E10 had a 24 millimeter, the ZV-1 had an 18. So it is much wider, yes. Light bulb finally going off. I need someone to follow me around all day long and just smack me over the head every time I'm being a dummy. All right, okay, I'm happy about that. That clears things up. Okay. But yeah, the overall impression I got that I came out of the store with was, the ZV-1 Mark II was a lot wider. The lens was a lot wider than I expected. It's usable. Most people, when you watch a YouTube review and they talk about how the lens isn't wide enough, it's usually because they're holding it in their hand. So, for example, if someone is holding a GoPro in their hand, it's here. But I don't do that. Even with my GoPro, I always have it. This is a short grip for me, but even on this short grip, it ends up being much farther away, like double the distance. So even like if I had the GoPro here, it has a certain field of view, but I'm not holding it there. I'm holding it out there, like it's even way out of the screen right now. I hold it far in front of me. And with the Sony ZV-1 Mark II, I would do the same thing. I would mount it on this same grip. So I wouldn't be holding the ZV-1 here in my hand. I would be holding it out there because I always use a grip. So even if the lens is a little bit tight, when you look at it in a YouTube review, it's because most people hold the camera in their hand, and I don't. I always have a grip. So I add a lot of width that way. So in terms of width, the ZV-1 Mark II is probably not a bad option, though I keep hoping that a camera company will release a vlogging camera with a fixed lens that goes down to 10 millimeters, but that'll never happen in a million years. They'll never get the message. My tracking, there we go. The track, it was focused on the wall. I could see my camera decided that the wall was the thing to focus on. Now it's back on my face. Kind of funny. The last time, I seem to be thinking a lot about technology, so this podcast may be a lot about technology. The last time I used this Olympus to record a podcast, I was using a different lens. I was using this lens. It's an amazing lens. It's a Panasonic 12 to 35 zoom lens. Gorgeous lens. So that's what I was using last time. But one issue with this is that it is a Panasonic lens, so it may or may not work that well with Olympus focusing systems, because I'm mounting a Panasonic lens on an Olympus body, and then the focusing systems may not be quite as strong. Anyway, I just say that because as I'm recording this with my Olympus and the 12 millimeter lens, that tracking box on my face seems almost like it just had 28 cups of coffee. It's like supercharged. It's like panic stricken almost. It's thinking about what do I focus on? What do I focus on? What do I focus on? It just seems to be much more accurate and much more precise. It just seems to be working much harder. And then when I was using this Panasonic lens, I had the same focusing box, but it never moved around. It didn't seem to be as accurate. But yeah, I think about this stuff all the time, and in the end, it wouldn't occupy me quite as much if weight wasn't an issue. Because if, like right now, for example, I'm going to be going back to Sumatra in a few days, in a week or 10 days, something like that. And I'm going to go on a bike ride in Sumatra, finally, which I've been planning to do for a few months now and just haven't gotten around to doing. So I have to decide what cameras to bring with me. And of course, when you're on a bike ride or even backpacking around, you want your bags to be as light as possible. So then you're thinking, oh, should I bring the Olympus? Should I not bring the Olympus? And yesterday, after my experience looking at all the Sony cameras and then playing around with my Olympus, it reminded me how nice it is to have a real camera. And then I was thinking, yeah, it'd be real nice to bring the Olympus with me back to Sumatra. And then I have the Olympus and the GoPro. And if weight were not an issue, it'd be a no-brainer. It'd be like, well, yeah, obviously, I have this camera. It's the best camera I own by far, by leaps and bounds. Amazing 12mm lens. Yeah, bring it. Why not bring it? But then as soon as add another 3 or 4 pounds into your bag, it's like, okay, that's why you don't bring it. Things are getting pretty heavy. But then yesterday I was sitting around thinking, well, yeah, just bring it. And I put the 12mm lens on it, and the 12mm lens is tiny. It's a pancake style lens, very lightweight. I think it weighs 139 grams, which is next to nothing. So I thought, okay, well, why not? Just bring the Olympus, bring the 12mm, not that heavy, and just see what happens. But then as soon as I start thinking along those lines, and then I think about something like Thaipusam, like I'm thinking about going up to Batu Caves for the big Thaipusam ceremony. I did this once before. There's a video on Planet Doug where I went to Thaipusam at Batu Caves and shot a video there. And I think at that time I had a Panasonic G85 camera, maybe. I can't remember. But anyway, as soon as I think about going up there for Thaipusam, then I realize, well, you want a little bit of a better camera, and you want a little bit of zoom capability, like a GoPro for capturing that experience, depending on how creative you want to get or how artistic you want to be. I mean, the GoPro can film anything, but it's filming everything in exactly the same way. Super wide, wide angle, capture everything. And if something very interesting, some smaller event or detail is there, you can't zoom in on it. You're just basically capturing everything in super wide angle. And I thought, well, if you have your Olympus, then you have a nicer camera for capturing something as unusual as a Thaipusam. But then I realized, well, the 12mm lens doesn't cut it either. If I go up to Batu Caves for Thaipusam, well, then I want a zoom lens of some kind, and then, of course, I want to bring this lens. And it's a heavy lens. So now I started off with this idea of, yeah, bring the Olympus, bring the 12. It's not so heavy. But then as soon as I start thinking about it, it's like, well, once you have the Olympus, there are many occasions where you're going to want to zoom in a little bit. Then you want to bring this. And now things have gotten much, much heavier. So it's sort of like my brain goes around and around and around. Bring the Olympus. Don't bring it. Bring it with the 12. Don't bring it's like again, if I had someone to carry my backpack for me, and I just had access to all of this gear all the time, well, then it's a no-brainer, right? Just bring it all. I love having all this gear. So, anyway. So those are the camera technology thoughts. The mouse, this is a Logitech, I believe it's the M720 something something. It has a special name. Triathlon, M720 Triathlon. So it's a little bit of a fancier mouse. It has, the scroll wheel, and you can click on it to make it smooth scrolling, or you can make it ratchet. And of course, it has the left button, the right button, and then it has 3 buttons on the side here. You can pair it with several devices at the same time. So I can use this mouse with my laptop, with a tablet, with a smartphone, and just switch from one to the other just at the click of a button, which is really nice. And it has another hidden button underneath the thumb. So essentially and it's got a clickable, so there's another button there, and the scroll wheel tilts. So you can tilt to the left, tilt to the right. And I use all of those buttons when I'm editing video. It raises your productivity dramatically, like just to be able to scroll left, scroll right, just by tilting the wheel, and then having you can program all the buttons to do whatever you need to do. So I really like having a bit of a fancier mouse like this, and being a little bit more expensive. I think it's more reliable for scanning, what do you call this? On the bottom. Like a cheaper mouse will work really well on a mouse pad, but I'm always sitting on a bed, so I need the mouse to work well with a bed sheet. So it has to track really accurately, but on a bed sheet. And I'm not sure that a cheaper mouse can do that. Anyway, but I've had this for a long time, and the left button is the one you use all the time, and it's sticking. And I've gotten in all kinds of trouble recently. I talked about this a couple places where, like, I'm working on a post for Patreon, and when you're doing a Patreon post, there's like different windows. You write all of your content, and then you click next, and then you get to all the publishing details. And I have to choose very specific settings about the tiers and release date and all kinds of things. I have to choose a lot of items on the posting window, but then because the button sticks, as soon as I hit next, it automatically keeps clicking. It goes click, click, click. It's like clicking automatically, and I accidentally post something to Patreon before I've made any selections, and I screwed up all the time. And I think I've changed all the settings on DaVinci Resolve, my editing program. I think I've screwed things up somehow. I've changed settings that I don't know what I changed. Because even if I'm trying to click and drag something, you hold down the left button, click, and then you're dragging, but then the button may or may not stay clicked. And as I'm dragging across the computer laptop screen, suddenly it lets go and starts clicking on whatever's underneath it. And I'm closing windows, I'm opening programs, changing menu settings, and it was getting really dangerous. So I thought, okay, no, can't use this anymore. So I went to Thunder Match at Mega Mall, and I couldn't find a mouse that suited me. I spent a long time there looking at all the different options, and then all I was going to do was buy a cheap one, because I thought, don't get fancy. You've got way too much technology as it is. Just buy the cheapest little clicky mouse. And that's what I was going to do, but as soon as I started thinking about it, then I remembered, well, no, I can't buy one of these cheap ones because I need that tilty left-right scroll wheel. I use that all the time. If I didn't have that, now I'm suddenly having to manually scroll to the left, and it's going to take forever. And I started thinking about all the features of this mouse, and I thought, well, nah, I can't buy one of the cheap ones. And even if I buy one of the cheap ones, chances are it's not going to be able to scroll on a bed sheet anyway. They only cost like 30 to 50 ringgit, and I thought, well, just buy one of the cheap ones and just try it out. You're not risking a lot of money, 35, 40 ringgit, and then try it out for a few days. And if it doesn't work, you can go back and buy a more expensive one. But when I was there, I realized you can't even buy, they didn't even have this mouse. I just wanted to replace this one. And they don't stock it. Someone there told me, no, they don't make that one anymore, though I have seen it online. But anyway, all the mice, the fancy mice that they had on display, none of them were appropriate for me. None of them had the features that I want. And they had one, the guy kept pushing me towards one mouse. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's like a spaceship. It was like designed for engineers or something because it was really tall and your whole hand just kind of drapes over it like it's a mountain. I was like, yeah, I can't carry that thing around. And then the feature set was not designed for video editing anyway. It was designed for professional engineers or something. So yeah, I have no use for that. And the one mouse that might have been sort of in this range, it didn't have the tilting scroll wheel, which I really wanted, and it was a silent mouse. I guess silent mice are very popular in office environments because, you don't want to disturb all of your neighbors or something. Like, for some reason, this clicking is too loud. Come on, give me a break. And these silent mice, the way they make them silent is by making the clicking action as delicate as possible. And when they had the mice out on display, and I got to play around with all the different models, and all the ones that had the silent mechanism, was like, I need feedback. There isn't enough feedback that you've clicked. I need a little bit of a sound, and I need more movement. And the only fancy mice they had silent mechanisms. So I walked out of Thunder Match. I didn't buy anything. And then it may have been a good thing, because I got back here last night, and then I was playing around with this mouse, and I got myself in trouble again because of the left click. And then I remembered, I can switch the buttons. If you download the Logitech app, which I did, I have it because I program all the buttons how I want them to operate. You have, for each of these buttons, you have like 30 different options. You can make every button do 30 different things, and you can customize it for how you like to work. And then I thought, maybe I can switch the left and right. So I looked I loaded the Logitech program, and there's like a one button, switch left, right. So I've done that now, which makes this mouse usable, but this one, the right button, is now the main clicker, and the left button is the right click menu, the drop down menu one. So that's how I've been using it last night and this morning. And the only thing is, in terms of clicking on a mouse, we have very powerful memory, physical memory. What's the word I'm looking for? Where you do something physical so many times, you don't even have to think about it. It's just automatic. And if you're ever on a mouse and you want to click, you're just clicking like this. It's instinctive. And now I have to train my brain and my fingers to stop. Oh, no, if I want to click, it's the right side. And it would take a few days to retrain my body and my brain to remember, okay, this is clicking, this is right clicking. Left is right, and right is left, and left is right. But it works perfectly. Works. So now that's what I've been doing. So anyway, I don't have to buy a mouse immediately. I can get by with this one for now. I just have to remember, this is left, this is right. But anyway, those are some of my technology stories that have been going on in my life. And I think for now, I could go on and on, as you can imagine. But I think that will be the end of my this technology section of the Planet Doug podcast. Finito. Now it is time for coffee number 2 and YouTube stories. But first, good news. I just got a knock on the door, and the hotel clerk. There's one man here in particular. He seems to be in charge of the hotel. He's the senior staff and very friendly guy. And we talk a lot, and he's gotten to know me a bit and my particular habits. And then, he knocked on the door and said, no, I can stay in this room, even though I booked a single and I'm in a double, and the whole hotel is fully booked because of the complexity of online booking from Agoda and Traveloka and booking. Who knows really what's going on with reservations? But anyway, he did some magic with his booking system, and he said, yeah, you can just stay in this room, so no big deal. But again, if I do book for future, more days, then I have to make sure to click on the double room option so that the pricing evens out. Oddly enough, though, when I booked this double room, it was cheaper than the single. So, in fact, You might think I'm getting a deal now that I'm staying in a double room, but I booked a single. The single was more expensive than the double, which is, who knows what goes on with online booking. It's crazy. So, YouTube stories. I don't have a lot of deep dive sort of thoughts here. It's more of a general overview. I'm still following a few travel vloggers like Tread the Globe. I don't really follow them, but Tread the Globe, the UK van life people, they came back to Malaysia. So I knew, so since they came back to Malaysia, I thought I'd watch a couple of their videos just to see what it is they're doing here, what's going on. And then there's a guy called Nick K, an American. I don't really watch all of his videos or follow him carefully, but he's a cyclist. He rides a bike, and I find that interesting. So I check in with him, and he's got some interesting things going on. And then there is Unamoto, the Canadian, who is riding his motorcycle around the world. Him I follow closely. I watch all of his videos and stay on top of what he is doing. And then there is the two mad explorers, Luke and Naomi, who are in the middle of cycling from Bangkok to Shanghai. And their journey is just getting underway, where they bought their bike and bought all their gear, and their journey is just beginning. So I've been watching their videos just to see how their trip unfolds. So I thought I could just chat a little bit about all of those YouTubers. And starting with Tread the Globe, Chris and Marianne, right? The man his name is Chris, and Marianne, that's the woman's name, from the UK. And I know that in general terms for their YouTube channel, I guess they were living a somewhat normal life in the UK. And then they had some experiences with friends and family members, health problems. I believe Marianne donated a kidney to someone to help save their life, and there was some drama associated with that. But anyway, these sorts of experiences got them thinking about life in general. When you come to the end of your life, what do you wish you had done? And they decided to make a big change in their life. So they did that thing that so many YouTubers talk about. They gave up their jobs. They sold all their possessions. I guess they own some kind of a house or condo or something, and they kept it, but they rented it out to get an income from that. And they decided to follow their dreams, essentially, and travel around the world in a van. And I wrote about that at length on Patreon, my ideas about different types of traveling, the forms of transportation. And out of all the choices you can make, backpacking, where you just use public transportation with a backpack, suitcase travel, bicycle touring, motorcycle touring, and then camper van touring. Out of all of those, I think personally, in terms of having a good experience, learning about the world and engaging with the world around you, I think van life is the worst of all of them. It's good when you're inside a country. So if you want to travel around Canada, going by camper van, like a small one, that's amazing. That's a great choice. So if you wanted to travel around the United States, Canada, Mexico, and you bought one vehicle to go around that region, I think that's an okay choice. But as soon as you're talking about crossing oceans and then going to multiple countries, crossing a lot of borders, then I think van life becomes, there's a point of diminishing returns, because you're sitting inside this giant, relatively giant vehicle, staring out the windshield all the time. You're basically engaged with the world from inside a bubble, looking out glass windows, and you're stuck on highways most of the time, because taking a van onto back roads is pretty challenging. Then you're going to be stuck in traffic jams. You're always going to be looking for parking. You're always going to be dealing with customs papers, import papers, tax documents, driver's licenses. Every country you go to, I mean, it becomes so complicated, the way I wrote about it on Patreon, that the idea is that this vehicle will take you around the world, but in fact, 90% of your time and effort is spent maintaining that vehicle and just moving that vehicle from place to place. So in fact, it's not the vehicle taking you around the world, it's you taking the vehicle around the world. There's so much work involved, and I don't think you get a lot of advantages out of it, and it's far more expensive and things like that. So for me, it would be my absolute last choice. For me, bicycle touring is the best. If you're not a YouTuber, that's a twist, I guess. At least if you're traveling in a van, you can. I was talking about how it'd be amazing to bring all this camera gear with me all the time. Well, in a van, you can do that. You can bring all of your gear easily. So that is one advantage. And I noticed in their most recent video, they're in Borneo now, and they don't have their camper van. They left it behind in the UK. When they got to Borneo, they actually were given a four-wheel drive Isuzu. The company gave them one to use, and that's what they're driving around Borneo on. And I noticed when their latest video, they got out a Starlink internet Wi-Fi device. So now, because they're in a van or in a truck, essentially, they can carry around a big Starlink Wi-Fi satellite connector, and they take that outside and they put it on the ground. So they have their own personal internet that they travel the world with, which is really nice. But as a backpacker, of course, carrying around all that extra heavy gear is not really an option. But anyway, that's what they're doing. And they're originally what they were going to do, because they knew they were coming back to Malaysia and they didn't want to bring their van all the way here. So their idea was to go to Borneo and rent or buy some kind of a four-wheel drive vehicle. And I think in their minds, they have this idea, as we all do, of like Borneo, jungle, muddy, dirt roads, a very difficult area to go to. But for me and my money, I don't know whether they need it. This Isuzu truck, or the ones that they were looking at renting or buying, I don't think you need it. I think based on where they're going to go, the tourist attractions, they're going to be on the main roads all the time anyway. Maybe one time they'll take advantage of this giant four-wheel drive truck and go into some sort of jungle muddy road. But my sense is they're going to go on normal roads most of the time. And they could have just rented a car, like just a normal car would have taken them anywhere they wanted to go in Sabah and Sarawak, I think just fine, and Brunei. I don't think they'll ever really be in a situation where for days at a time they'll be using the four-wheel drive power and the winches and all the tough high-tech gear that is in this truck. I don't think they need it. I mean, it's fun to have. Why not? If Isuzu called me up and said, hey, do you want to take this giant four-wheel drive truck and ride around Sabah and Sarawak? Well, I'm going to say yes. I don't need it. I'm probably not going to need it, but I'm not going to say no. So it's no problem that they have this thing. But in terms of traveling in general, I think, in general, a van or big truck is the worst way to travel. But anyway, as I said, they went there intending to buy one or rent one, and they went to a lot of used car lots looking at various four-wheel drive vehicles, and they didn't find anything in their price range that would work. And then before they pulled the trigger on the purchase, they were contacted by Isuzu. And interestingly enough, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that this would happen to them because they are so advertiser friendly. Like, most YouTubers, no big company is going to contact me, A, because my audience isn't big enough, I'm not professional enough, but also I'm not mainstream enough. Chris and Marianne, they appeal to people. Like, I think I'm older than they are, but when I'm watching their videos, I feel like I'm watching my parents on a holiday. That's how they come across. Like a friendly married couple in their 50s. They look to me like my parents. They speak like my parents. They act like my parents. So when I watch their videos, it's very family friendly, watching your elderly mother and father traveling around the world. That's what it feels like to me. So there's nothing controversial about them. And when I was watching their videos, I noticed they had advertisers from Incogni. Surfshark, Crag Hoppers, Zuzu, and of course all the YouTube ads. And they have this very highly polished website. They've really, and they have merchandise that they sell, Tread the Globe merchandise. And Chris, he seems to be the main video guy. He's doing all the filming, and I don't know how they share the editing, but every video he opens it with a quote, like an inspirational quote from some historical traveler or explorer or writer or something. And yeah, that kind of content. Every time he puts one of the quotes up, to be honest, I cringe a little bit. It's just like, I don't know, all these inspirational why I travel quotes, following your dreams kind of quotes. They don't hold a lot of meaning for me, and I always find them a little bit cringy. I remember a long time, I even did it when I started my YouTube channel. I think I was in Bangladesh, and I was trying to shape my videos to make them more like what I think of as what a YouTube video should be, and trying to do all the right things. And then I got this idea myself, the same as Chris. I was going to put quotes at the beginning, and I think I did it for one video. I stumbled across a quote, something to do with a river and traveling or something, and I put it at the beginning of the video, and then I felt so embarrassed about it. I never did it again. It was like, okay, this is not my style. I'm not a inspirational quote of the day kind of person. I mean, if I'm going to quote anybody, I want to quote me. I do a lot of talking, so I thought, well, if I want to write something, I'll write it. I don't need to quote other people. I've got my own thoughts that I'm quite happy with. But so, yeah, I don't think I have very much else to say about them. I don't even know whether I'll continue watching their videos. As I said, they're not designed for me. Their experiences aren't meant to appeal to someone like me. It's like I said, it's like watching my parents take a holiday. So I'm not drawn to their videos very much. So who else do I want to talk about? Nick K might be interesting to talk about, because he's a very much a contrast, where I talked about how a van trip to me is like the least interesting way to travel. Nick K, he travels lately exclusively by bicycle, like touring bicycle. And he's got the full set of camping gear, rear pannier bags, front pannier bags. He's got the tent and sleeping bag, or whatever. He's got a pretty small, lightweight kind of kit, but he's traveling by bicycle. Though it's interesting that his timeline on YouTube is incredibly complicated. It's all mixed up, because I started watching his channel again recently because he landed in Thailand, and the very first video was him at the airport, and he's got his huge bicycle box. And I can relate to all that logistics. He was talking about, boxing up my bike and getting it to the airport and getting it here. So exhausting, so stressful, but now I'm here at the airport. And he showed his bicycle box, and he was talking about, now I have to take my bike out and I got to put it together. But how am I going to get away from the airport, because there's nothing but major highway systems here? So he was saying a lot of things that I could relate to. But then I figured out that these videos from Thailand, they're 7 months old. He had this experience 7 months ago, and he's just now posting the videos, which I guess is fine. But then he started posting videos. Well, this is another story. He intended to go to Korea. So in real time, he's supposed to be cycling around South Korea, because he did a long cycling trip there. And I guess South Koreans are just as interested in YouTubers as Malaysians are. And he got a huge following in South Korea. And he kind of went, whoa, that was nice. I think I'll go back there. So he flew back to South Korea, and with his bicycle, and he was going to continue traveling around South Korea making YouTube videos. But he was banned from the country. They wouldn't allow him in. And I didn't do a deep dive into all of this, so I don't know all the details. But from what I could pick up, I think it's because they thought, well, they didn't think it. They said, Well, you're in South Korea working as a YouTuber, you're earning money in our country, but you're doing it on a tourist visa. So technically, you're breaking immigration law. If you want to make money while you're in Korea, you need a work visa. So they wouldn't let him into the country. And I've thought about this for years. Ever since I started making YouTube videos, I was anticipating this becoming an issue. I mean, it's not really an issue for me because I'm not really making money, but most YouTubers, the famous ones, they're making a lot of money on the road. Technically, they have an income inside that country. Whatever country they're in, technically, they're working, earning money. So, and yet they're doing it on a tourist visa, which is illegal. So I was anticipating that this is only possible right now because the world hasn't figured this out yet, and they haven't figured out how to deal with it. But over time, I think you're going to see this. This is the start of a trend that eventually all YouTubers, all digital, they're going to be classed as a digital nomad, and they're going, and then immigration is going to say to them, okay, well, if you have a YouTube channel and your YouTube channel is monetized and you're earning money from products you're creating in our country, you need a digital nomad visa or a work visa. You can't do that on a tourist visa. I think we're going to see that more and more in the future. But who knows? Maybe it won't happen in my YouTubing lifestyle. So yeah, we'll see. And it might be kind of hard to police, though. I can see, how do they know you're a YouTuber that's making money? Like if I show up in South Korea with my bicycle or something, and they look in my luggage and they say, oh, well, you've got a GoPro. Are you making videos for money? And then I can say, well, I make YouTube videos, but I'm not making any money with them. You know, I could say to them, I'm doing it as a hobby, not as a professional. And how are they going to prove otherwise, right? But in Nick's case, they saw it. They could go to his YouTube channel and there were videos there, and I guess he talks a lot about making money and this and that, and they said, look, here's your YouTube channel. You have a huge following. Everyone in Korea is supporting you, and you're making money in our country, so you can't do that on a tourist visa. So anyway, they wouldn't let him in, and now he's in the Philippines, so he decided to go to the Philippines instead. So he's posting travel videos from the Philippines right now in real time, I think, and he's also posting videos from Thailand, and he's alternating one to the other. But some of the videos are 7 months old, and the other ones, they could be real time, could be months old. I don't really know. So yeah, things do get a little bit complicated with the YouTube travelers, and yeah, I find that kind of interesting. Yeah. I'm having trouble moving around here because I have two pieces of furniture on the bed. I've got one over here where I have my coffee and other gear laid out on this little, there's this furniture in the room that sits on the floor. I picked it all up and I put it on the bed. So I have this one here as a bedside table, and I have another one in front of me right there. And I have my camera on a tripod mounted on this other piece of furniture that I picked up off the floor and put on the bed. And I find that kind of funny because when the hotel staff knocked on my room to talk to me, I could see them looking through the door and they're like, what have you done to our room? And I do that all the time. Every hotel room, I just rearrange all the furniture and I create a more comfortable environment for myself. And when I leave, I put it all back. Even in Sumatra, I move the beds around, and the TV I take off the table, and I put the TV in the corner because I want the TV table so I can lay out other gear. And then when I check out, I put everything back the way it was, and I move the bed back, and I sweep the floor, and I clean the bathroom. So I do totally rearrange the room when I move in, but I do put it back before I go. But I can see the hotel staff kind of going, what have you done? All the furniture was piled up on the bed when he looked through the door. And I have to reassure him. It's like, don't worry, I'll put it all back when I check out. But interestingly, again, I can fold the two mad explorers into this discussion because the two mad explorers, Luke and Naomi, they're also riding bicycles. But when I watch their videos, they don't seem to be taking advantage of what a bicycle has to offer, because even though they're riding bicycles, they're riding them down huge highway systems. And then once you're doing that, what's the point in a way? Okay, you're riding a bike and you're getting exercise and you're doing this, you're doing that. But I mean, if you're just going to go down a huge highway system and see nothing, then what's the point? You might as well have a van or a motorcycle or get on a bus. And Nick, the American cycling guy, he takes his bicycle in tiny alleyways. He really takes advantage of what a bike can do for you. So he seems to be getting away from the big highway systems and then going down small roads through the markets, through villages, through the countryside. So I admire that quite a bit. But at the same time, if you look at YouTube videos, travel videos in general, almost without exception, the cycling videos are the most boring to watch. And I find that's a real tension in YouTube in general, that for me, traveling on a bicycle is the most interesting, the richest way to travel. And yet when you record that experience on video, it comes across as quite boring. And then Luke and Naomi, for example, they kind of lean into that boring aspect because I said they're riding down a highway and they're really focused on the numbers. And if I'm cycling, I make a mental effort to just ignore the bike. The point is not the bicycle. The point is not bicycle travel. The point is where you are, the experience you're having, and your form of transportation, that can just be in the background. But Luke and Naomi, I mean, every morning it's a discussion of, okay, how many kilometers will we ride? And then after they're riding for 1 hour, well, we've been riding for 1 hour and we've covered 20 kilometers. We have 60 kilometers to go. I hope we can go 20 kilometers per hour. That means we will get there in 3 hours. Like, it's just an avalanche of numbers. And then when cyclists get into mountains, suddenly they have altitude to talk about. And then all they talk about is numbers. They start filming a video and they'll say, oh, this morning I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, and then I rode for 30 kilometers, and I climbed 500 meters in altitude, but then I descended 300. It's just like you're listening to a mathematician, because when you're cycling, you get obsessed with the numbers. Altitude climb, altitude loss, distance covered, numbers after numbers, how many days, how many hours, what speed, your average speed, your maximum speed, your minimum speed. And then you get people that are monitoring their trips on motorcycles, and they're using all these apps that even track their lean angles. You know, what was their maximum lean angle going? Just numbers, numbers, numbers. And it's really easy to get caught up in that world because as a cyclist, you do have to think about the numbers to an extent. Even if you're deliberately trying to ignore them, even I have to wake up in the morning and think about, okay, well, the next town up the road that may or may not have a cheap hotel to stay in, can I get there? How many kilometers away is it? Will I be climbing all day? Because if you're climbing all day, well, you're not covering as much distance as if you're going on flat land where you can go faster. So your brain has to be occupied with numbers to an extent. But once you fire up your GoPro and start talking, I think those numbers, just leave them alone. Don't talk about them. Just have an experience. And then Luke and Naomi kind of lean into the numbers a lot because they're treating their bike trip not as a way of experiencing the country. They have been treating it as a physical challenge, something difficult to endure, to overcome, like an accomplishment. So right from the beginning, their whole trip was described as 4,000 kilometers of cycling from Bangkok to Shanghai. And in their mind, they've already arrived in Shanghai, and they're going, woohoo, we made it, we did it. What an accomplishment. So that's what their mindset is like when it comes to cycling. And from a a life experience point of view, I've never approached it that way. I just don't like buses. To be honest, the only reason I've ever ridden a bike in the past was not because I love cycling so much. It's just because I hate buses so much. All the hassles to deal with certain countries around the world, figuring out getting to the bus station, when the bus leaves, jammed into this thing with 100 other people. Of course, the world has changed now. You go to countries like Vietnam, and the buses are like super luxurious, sleeper, luxury limousine travel. The world has changed dramatically, so maybe buses aren't as bad as they used to be, but I never liked getting anywhere by bus. And then I learned that traveling by bicycle is, you're free. You have some independence. And so that's why I might have ridden a bicycle in the past. It got nothing to do with, wow, I rode 8,000 kilometers and what an accomplishment. It was just better than traveling by bus. That's, if you get me talking about bike touring, like, why do you like bike touring? Well, it's not as bad as bus travel. That's as much as I will praise it. I do like the freedom of it and that sort of thing. But anyway, so yeah, you've got the Tread the Globe in their giant four-wheel drive Isuzu, and then you've got two Mad Explorers riding pretty cheap bikes that aren't really suitable for what they're doing, but on major highway systems. They changed their route, by the way. The two Mad Explorers, they originally plotted a route going almost directly east from Bangkok, cross the border into Laos, Vietnam, Hanoi, straight line to Shanghai. But now on the way, they changed their mind, and now they're heading north, and they're going to go through Vientiane, the capital of Laos. And then from Laos, then they'll sort of go towards the east. So they're changing their route. And then we've got Nick K. He appears to be riding from Cebu to Manila, which, I don't know. It may not, I don't know if that's the best choice. I'm going to have to see exactly what route he's going to follow. But heading from a major urban center like Cebu, heading towards another major urban center like Manila in a line, I don't know whether that's the best. From an experiential point of view, from where he is, I would head somewhere else, into the Visayas, pick an island that nobody ever goes to and just go traveling around the edges of all these islands down there rather than following a line to Manila. But we'll see. But he is making an effort to get into the smaller roads. And I think he's leaving from Cebu and heading south along the coast. I haven't watched that video yet, but it might be interesting for me because I did the same thing one time. I rode my bike out of Cebu, and then I followed the coast of Cebu, the island of Cebu. So I followed the same coastline that he did. And so I should recognize a few things. But as I said, he seems to be making an effort to get off the main, well, even the coastal highway there is not a main highway. The two Mad Explorers riding through that part of Thailand, I mean, those are huge highway systems. Thailand has never appealed to me as a place to ride a bike anyway. It's just way too developed, big highways, massive trucks. It's just, if you go up to the Mae Hong Son Loop on a bicycle, some like a more hilly, mountainous region in the north, that could be interesting, but even there, I think you're better off with a scooter or something like that. So I wouldn't go cycling in Thailand at all to begin with. Vietnam, northern Vietnam would be cool on a bicycle, and the Philippines is amazing on a bicycle. Yeah, that's a very cool place to go bike touring. So, yeah, I think those are all the YouTubers. There's been a couple more videos from Itchy Boots, but I haven't watched them yet. I guess she exited already out of Iraq and entered Kuwait. I think that's the most recent video. I did watch her video about getting the electrical loom reinstalled on her motorcycle, because as you know, if you're following her story, you know that when she was in Iraq, two thieves stole her motorbike, but they couldn't get it started. And I guess as part of their efforts to get the motorcycle started, they cut through the bundle of wires they call, I didn't know this is a new word for me, the loom. when you take all the electrical system of a motorcycle, they take all the wires and bundle them together. They call that the loom. And then they just cut right through the entire loom. And then she's been struggling with that ever since because all the electronics didn't work. She has to kickstart her motorbike, stuff like that. And then now I guess in Kuwait, she managed to get a brand new loom shipped to her by the man who custom built her motorcycle for her. I guess he shipped a replacement loom, and then she brought the motorbike into a shop there, and then they tore her motorbike down and then had to take out all the wiring and put the new loom in place. Can't imagine what kind of a job that was, particularly because her motorbike, even though it's an older model from the 70s or the 80s, it was a custom redesigned. So who knows, when these mechanics were looking at her bike, did they even know what they were looking at? But anyway, they got it all done. She now has electric start again. Everything is working, lights. And it's kind of funny to see her riding the motorcycle now because she keeps reminding herself, it's like, oh yeah, I have a turn signal. Because she got used to not even having a turn signal, not having any headlights. And then I guess you just develop a habit of never indicating your turn because you don't have turn signals anyway. But now she has them again. And she keeps reminding herself, oh yeah, I gotta turn, hit the turn signal. So I did watch that video, and yeah, major overhaul of the motorcycle. So we put new tires on it because I guess she's going into desert areas, and she realized their current tires were not good enough for that sandy environment. So she got brand new tires, oil change, changed everything, basically rebuilt the whole motorcycle from top to bottom. And again, that kind of feeds into my thoughts about how the form of transportation you choose has a big effect on the experiences you have. And I guess if you're all about the motorcycle, you're all about the journey, then sure, travel by motorcycle. But if you're more about experiencing the country, you're better off traveling by bus, by train, even by bicycle or a scooter. I think a scooter is probably the best compromise out of all of those, because a bicycle can be way too slow, particularly for YouTube, because the advantage that a motorcycle traveler has is they have the ability to go to a lot of interesting attractions and beautiful scenery. On a bicycle, you can travel an entire day of 80 to 150 kilometers in one day. And during that entire day, it's an amazing, wonderful experience, and you personally see a lot of interesting things, but none of it will be, it's possible that nothing was grand or majestic enough for a YouTube video. But if you're on a motorbike, you can actually plot a route that takes you past an amazing mountain, a glacier, a gorgeous lake, a mountain pass, a desert, and you pass all of those things in one day. On a bicycle, you may have seen nothing for the entire day. The journey, yeah, it's a whole different deal. But anyway, why was I talking about that? Yeah, Itchy Boots and her motorcycle. Yeah, what I was saying is her attention is so focused on the motorcycle. So there she was in Kuwait, but of course the whole video had nothing to do with Kuwait. Like, what is Kuwaiti food? What does the Kuwaiti language sound like? Kuwaiti music, Kuwaiti movies, like nothing. It's all about going to the local, I think it was a BMW shop or something, and then getting the mechanics to break down her motorcycle, replace the wiring system. So the entire video was about the motorcycle, had nothing to do with the country. And so the country becomes almost irrelevant. And I guess, yeah, it's about the journey, not the destination, I guess. Or not even the journey, it's all about the form of transportation. So, yeah. So, yeah, Itchy Boots. Any other YouTubers I've been following? Let me double check. I'm sure there are others, but I don't see any on my list that I wanted to talk about today. So, for YouTube stories, I think I will end it right there. The first TV show I wanted to talk about is something called Earth Abides. And yeah, this pop culture on the Planet Doug podcast is a little bit outdated because I haven't been talking about pop culture very much. So a lot of time has passed. and I've watched a lot of TV shows and a lot of movies. And in fact, I actually sat down and talked about a whole bunch of these already, and that was on a previous podcast, but I made a mistake and my microphone ran out of power. So I talked for like an hour and a half about TV shows, and there was no audio at all. So I already talked about this show one time, but yeah, newbie mistake. I forgot to check my microphone. But yeah, Earth Abides. It's a 6-episode series, quite a short one. And I ended up watching it because I love post-apocalyptic stories. And this one, Earth Abides, is based on a book by the same name that was written in 1949. And George R. Stewart, I think, was the name of the author. And that factors heavily into my thoughts about the story. The fact that it was written in 1949. Remember that. And the movie and the TV show, Earth Abides, same name, book and show, follows the events of the book quite closely in terms of the characters, who they are, and the plot and the story, everything. I believe it follows the book quite closely, which is also part of what I wanted to talk about. Because when you go to the YouTube trailer for it and you scan through all the reaction in social media, a lot of people dumped all over this show. And why they dumped all over it is quite significant. It's quite telling, because in the show, our hero, the main guy, is a white guy in his 20s, I guess, late 20s or early 30s, maybe late 20s. And he's a TV actor, so he's tall, broad-shouldered, heavily muscled. He's a good-looking guy, and the character himself is a bit implausible when you think about it. I always find that kind of interesting, that we're dealing with the end of the world. Like, the human race has been wiped out by a virus. We're talking about a post-apocalyptic world, and there's almost nobody left alive. So this man, he's the focus of the story, and he's kind of presented as maybe the last human being on the planet. And what are the chances, statistically speaking, that the last person alive is going to be a white dude in his mid to late 20s who's tall, good-looking, intelligent, nice guy, sensitive, right? How many people like that actually exist? I mean, I challenge you to go outside, wherever you are right now, and just, I don't know, just go for a walk down the street and just run into somebody like that. The average human being is not good looking. We just aren't. Movie stars and TV actors and singers, yeah, they're all the best looking people on the planet. So, and if you're going to be watching a TV show, you figure, well, we might as well cast a good looking person. Why not? That means more people will enjoy watching our show. So all actors are good-looking people. They're not going to go out there and just hire somebody like me, hire an average-looking person to be the star of their TV show that costs them millions of dollars to make. No, they're going to get a good-looking person. But in reality, statistically, if the entire human race gets wiped out and there's only one remaining man alive, statistically, he's probably going to be in his 50s or 60s. It's going to be a little bit shorter, not very attractive, and probably not even a very nice person, and not a very intelligent person, right? So anyway, I always find that kind of interesting, that here we have the last remaining human being, and he just happens to be a good-looking, really intelligent, really nice guy. You know, what are the chances of that ever happening in reality? It's just statistically. It's like go up on the International Space Station, take a dart, throw it, and down to the planet Earth, and whoever the dart hits randomly, that would be more like, and it would just hit an average person. But anyway, so he's our hero, and then as we go into the show, he runs into another person, right? Just a random, another survivor. There's like nobody alive for hundreds of miles in any direction. But one day he sees some smoke, and then he goes over there to investigate. Oh, smoke, maybe there's another survivor. And who does the survivor turn out to be? And this is why everybody's so upset with this show, because it's a woman, and the woman happens to be black. And then everybody in the YouTube comments are like, oh, woke Hollywood, this liberal nonsense, interracial couple. Now we've got a white man and a black woman. Why? Why did she have to be black? And they're blaming it on woke liberal media, woke liberal Hollywood, that they're jamming this down our throats. And they go on and on and on and on about that. But all these people that are so upset about this, they're not very intelligent people, of course, but they also didn't do their research, because this is what happened in the book. In the book, it's exactly the same. We've got a white guy, he's the hero, he meets another survivor, and the other survivor happens to be a black woman. So that was written in 1949 by the author. So all these people that are upset with the TV show, they're blaming it on modern left-wing woke Hollywood. They're completely wrong, because it has nothing to do with that. That plot line, those characters were created in 1949. And I do wonder how the book was received back then, because, yeah, modern day, really, it's common. Having a mixed race marriage, it's just perfectly common. But back in 1949, it would have been quite unusual. So when the writer, George R. Stewart, made that choice, I'm sure he made it quite deliberately, and he had something to say about the modern world. And I wonder, when the book was published, what people said back then. But all of that, to me, is utter nonsense. I think I'm just not smart enough to even pick up on these details. I'm watching the show, and he follows the smoke, and there's a woman there, and then he meets this woman, and okay, that's what's going to happen now. They're going to get together, and they're going to try to recreate life, and da-da-da-da. And I'm following the plot, and it never occurred to me even once that she was black. I'm sure I noticed mentally. It's like, oh yeah, she's black, he's white. But in terms of the storyline, it made no difference at all. So I just sort of didn't even think about it at the time. But with my brain, the Planet Doug brain, what I noticed is how unusual she was. Okay, she was black, but there's nothing unusual about that. But the thing is that he, the lone male survivor, was tall, heavily muscled, good-looking, and really intelligent, and a nice guy. And he happens to meet the last living woman on the planet Earth, as far as he knew, and she was also really intelligent, really strong, really nice, just like the perfect woman in almost every way. And she had a certain set of skills that he didn't have. So he was a little bit academic. He was all into technology. He would go to the library and get books to read up on building an electrical system, solar panels, all these sorts of things. She, the woman he meets, just happened to be highly skilled at gardening and these sorts of things, and hunting, and she was tough. He was a little bit sensitive, a little bit of a nice guy. She was tough with the rifle, and she's an incredible sniper. She's got incredible aim. She's a hunter. She's tough. She's strong. She's intelligent. She's really, really nice, really, really sensitive, and she was the exact same age. So when the two of them got together, they could have children and repopulate the planet, that sort of thing. So the Planet Doug brain, I was thinking, well, what are the chances of that? Again, I challenge myself, I challenge anybody out there to go outside, wherever you are in the world, go for like a 10-kilometer walk down the busy streets of wherever you are. What are the chances that you are going to meet, if you're a guy, you are going to meet the perfect woman for you, who is attractive, the same age, really intelligent, really strong, really sensitive, and really, really nice? You're not going to meet that woman. I mean, I'm talking about meeting your kindred spirit, like whatever your personality is, whatever your interests are. What are the chances in just random life running into your kindred spirit? It is practically zero, a very, very small percentage. So here we have a show where, you know, the last remaining man and the last remaining woman just happen to be, each of them, perfect specimens of each sex, and they happen to be a perfect physical and mental and emotional age match for each other. And that's what I was thinking. It was like, oh, come on. If I were the last man on Earth and I saw some fire and I went to investigate, the person I would find there would probably be another man, and it would be a man in their 80s who was quite frail. And I mean, the chances of finding someone who is the perfect match for you to recreate human civilization is very, very rare. And I remember when I watched the show, I was thinking about the Key and Peele skit. There's a very funny Key and Peele skit about this entirely, where the two male actors, of course, Key and Peele, they're playing two different characters, and it was a post-apocalyptic world, and we're following one of them who is wandering the earth, and he is the man from Earth Abides. He's strong and intelligent, and he's a hunter, and he's got it all together. And as he travels the world, he's looking for other human beings, and there's a voiceover narration. I've been alone on the earth for 10 years. I've never seen another human being. Oh, when will I ever see another? I'm so lonely. I really want, on and on and on. Then one day he does meet another survivor, and he's so excited. It's like, whoa, another human being. And then he watches that other survivor from a distance through binoculars. And then it turns out that this other survivor was just a complete moron, just a weird, dumb, goofy kind of person who was a polar opposite to our survivor. And then our survivor was sort of looking at him through the binoculars, and he wanted to find another human being so badly. And then when he finally found another survivor, he actually took up his rifle and shot him in the head, because he just couldn't even bear being around this guy. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't stand this guy. And he killed him. And I thought, okay, that's realistic. That is a realistic portrayal of the post-apocalyptic world. When you do meet another survivor, chances are you're not going to like them, because how often do you find people in life that you really genuinely like? It's rare. You have to work hard to make friends, to find people that you like, because we're all so different. But anyway, yeah, Earth Abides, I recommend it if you're into post-apocalyptic stories. I enjoyed it. It's got a slow burn. I think a lot of people didn't like it as well because they're used to big explosions and fighting off aliens, and they need a lot of action in their movies, especially like post-apocalyptic stories are always about zombies, and everybody's fighting the zombies, and everybody's getting killed and fighting other survivors. And very little of that happens in this show. It's all very low-key, very realistic, very slow. But I really enjoyed that. So I got a lot out of it. And I loved all this thought about rebuilding the world. Civilization has been wiped out. How do you survive? That kind of, I like thinking about that kind of stuff. But it did have mixed messages, I found, because being written in 1949, the author, George R. Stewart, he seemed to have very strong views about what the human race was doing to the natural environment. He seemed to have a strong environmentalist theme, that it was a good thing that the human race was wiped out, because there's a lot of visual imagery of the animal populations rebuilding. The animals and forests were taking over the world again, getting rid of mankind with all of their industry and pollution and chemicals and highways and all these sorts of things. But what I find really interesting is that he felt so strongly about that in 1949, and yet in 1949, the world would have been in much better shape than it is now in 2025. So back in 49, he thought the human race was destroying the world, and probably back then there were like 2 million people on the planet or something like that. And now in 2025, we have over 8 billion people, massive mega cities, and of course, rainforest being chopped down by the hundreds of square miles every day, all the animal populations being wiped out, and global warming, on and on and on. So, compared to what, like, the world George R. Stewart was living in 1949 was probably a paradise compared to what we have in 2025. And back in 49, he was appalled at what humans were doing to the world and the natural environment. So that was kind of weird, because in the story, that's the theme of the story, that civilization was destroying the natural world. And yet the heroes of the story, all they did for the entire show was rebuild industrial civilization. So, for example, our main character, he was teaching children, and he was talking about the old world and how, wow, back in the old world, cities were so huge with so many lights. There was light pollution. You couldn't even see the stars. You know, people forgot about the stars because you couldn't even see them. And all the kids are supposed to go, oh, that's so terrible. We love seeing the stars. But when the TV show ends, he's built a large community of several hundred people, and each of them is living in a separate house, and they have power from solar panels, and every house is electrified. So it was supposed to be a happy ending where the camera pulls back and you see that a lot, this community has grown and human civilization is rebuilding, and wow, isn't that amazing? But at the same time, because they're rebuilding civilization, now there's so much light, they won't be able to see the stars anymore themselves. And of course, they've got generators producing power when the solar panels don't work, and they're basically going to rebuild the industrial human world just as it was before. So there was kind of sort of a mixed message. It's not like these heroes turned into Luddites and rejected all technology. The only reason they even survived in the first place is that there were still Walmarts and hardware stores and libraries all around them, so that every day our hero would wake up and then his car still worked and he could get gas, and he would drive to the local hardware store and just go up and down the aisles, and the stores were filled with everything that we have today, all the technology. And he'd like, oh, I want to build solar panels. So he just drove to the store, and all these factories had already made all these solar panels, and he just grabbed a bunch of them, and he grabbed books from the library and read about electronics and how to put them together and how to build batteries and wiring systems and plumbing. And at one point they needed to get water, and they happened to have this crew where they had a giant drill with giant engines, and they could drill into the ground and find groundwater and get a well. So, and then food, of course, they survived on all the canned food that was all in the stores. So the only reason, I mean, the book, basically the story that George R. Stewart wrote was dissing human industrial civilization, and yet the only reason the human race even survived was on the dregs of human industry and civilization. Without any of that, they all would have died anyway. So, and they kind of presented that as a good thing, that these people were rebuilding their world. And yet I was thinking, well, they're just starting over and going to be right back where they were before. All these animal populations that are growing around them, yeah, they're going to, eventually the human population is going to get back to 8 billion, I mean, and then we're going to wipe out all the animals again anyway. So anyway, a bit of a mixed message there, but hey, what are you going to do? A movie that I watched recently that I enjoyed was called it's got a very complicated name, The Young and Prodigious T.S. Spivet. I think that's the full name, from 2013, so 11 years old, 12 years old, bit of an older movie. And I think it was directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, French. It's a French movie in terms of the director. It's in English, but it was a French director. And he is well known, in my world anyway, because I think his debut film was Delicatessen. And I remember watching Delicatessen decades ago whenever it came out, and it made a huge impression on me and just remains one of my favorite movies of all time. A very special kind of film, very popular worldwide. I think it won a bunch of awards. Very strange world. Jean-Pierre Jeunet has a certain style about him in terms of the visuals and the worlds that he creates. I can get a little bit crazy. And he applied a lot of that to the young and prodigious T.S. Spivet. There's a look to it. The world that our characters inhabit is a bit stylized, a bit fun, little bit of fantasy woven into it. And one of the reasons I liked it is it's a bit of a road trip movie. So the main character is a young boy, very much like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, a genius. And this genius young boy isn't really recognized by the local community for his good qualities because he's such a genius. He's also very socially awkward, like Sheldon, and then he gets bullied and everybody looks down on him because he just seems like a moron to them. He's incredibly smart, but he's smart in ways that the normal human doesn't really recognize as being smart. He's like the village idiot in a way, even though he's like super, super intelligent. And at one point in his life, he creates, or I don't know if he actually created it, but he designed something that looks like a perpetual motion machine, which of course in theory is impossible. There's no way to make one of those, but he designed something that was convinced people at that time that it was a perpetual motion machine, or was as close as you can get. But it was such an amazing design, it came to the attention of some museum directors in New York City, and they contacted him and wanted to give him an award and invite him to a big banquet and a big dinner to honor him. But of course, the museum people thought T.S. Spivet was a scientist. They thought he was a grown man, and they communicated with him like this was a grown man, a guy with a PhD working at a university. They didn't realize it was like an 11-year-old boy, a savant sort of thing. So then our T.S. Spivet, he runs away from home because he's misunderstood there. Nobody likes him in his hometown. And he goes on a journey by himself to travel across the United States from this little farming community in the middle of nowhere to get to New York City to attend this banquet and get his award. So it's a bit of a road trip movie, which I like. It's quirky. Characters are quirky. Everything about the place is quirky. And I thought it was a very good story. It's not a perfect movie in any way. I can see a lot of people not liking it. And if you tell me, oh, I didn't like that at all, I'm not going to argue with you. It's not the greatest movie I've ever seen. It's not a classic, but it is a movie that I watched that I quite enjoyed. It had a feeling almost like it was a play where there isn't a lot of sense of, even though it's a road trip movie, you don't get that sense of moving around the world. It's like a static environment in a way. And I like movies that are based on plays. Like an entire movie can happen inside one room, like a play, and I enjoy it immensely. So that doesn't really bother me that much. And it was also based on a book, and you can feel it. The thoughts and everything in it are very well developed because it was written as a book originally. So you can feel that too. Yeah. The young and prodigious T.S. Spivet. Yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit. In the sitcom world, I've been watching a new show called Animal Control, starring Joel McHale. And it's sort of what you might expect. Like if you imagine a sitcom taking place in an animal control office in the United States, in an American city, starring Joel McHale, I think you get the idea. It's a sitcom, and in a way, it makes me think a lot about Community, of course. Community, all-time classic, one of my favorite TV shows of all time. Animal Control, let me get this out of the way, is nowhere near on the level of Community. Community is up here, Animal Control is way down here. But it's perfectly serviceable as a sitcom. And I was thinking about this, how if you're a writer and you want to come up with a new sitcom and sell the idea to the studios, you start thinking about a situation, right? Because a sitcom has to take place at a certain location, because that's a situation comedy. So you might say, well, we could put it in a library. And I recently watched a Canadian sitcom that was based in a community library that I thought was quite good. But you start thinking about, okay, well, we could have a police show, and then the police station is your situation, or a hospital, or a fire station, and you go through the list of all the possible locations. And then it occurred to me, animal control, like a humane society rescuing animals. It's a perfect location for a comedy. And has it ever been done before? And I can imagine this writer being very excited, like, oh, I've got this amazing idea. Why has nobody thought of this before? Because for a show that happens, like a weekly show, you need a new story week after week after week. And that's why hospital shows and TV shows are so popular, lawyer shows are so popular, FBI shows, because they can just introduce a new plot every single week. For a police show, every week there's a new crime. So it's not that hard to come up with a new story. For a hospital show, every week there's a new patient and a new disease. And House MD, House gets a new patient every week. And then for every new episode, they just have to think of a new disease. It's like an endless supply of stories. And for a animal control, animal shelter, the story options are endless, because how many animals are out there? How many animals in funny situations can you come up with? So every single week, writing your comedy becomes an easier task, because you can be a raccoon in the attic, a rat in the kitchen, a lion escapes from the zoo, a zebra escapes from the zoo, an exotic pet like a tarantula escapes, right? Every single week, all you have to think of is, okay, animal situation, now we go out and rescue the animal. And it just, you almost say, well, it writes itself. So it's kind of a no-brainer to come up with that situation. I thought that was quite clever. And then Joel McHale, I can see him being typecast, and he is typecast. The character he plays in Animal Control is almost identical to the character he plays in Community, and it'd be kind of hard to write him any other way, because he is the one guy in the situation who doesn't belong. So like in Community, his character used to be a high-powered lawyer, and he's tall, good-looking, lots of muscles. He's like the perfect man. And now he gets disbarred from being a lawyer, and he has to go back to school to get his degree. And he goes to a community college, and he thinks he's better than everyone around him. He doesn't belong there. That community college is for losers, but he is an alpha male, and he's only there slumming it. And that's kind of the fish out of water tale you find in Community. And of course, he learns to humble himself, and he's not nearly as great as he thinks he is, and he builds a community, a family out of all the other losers at the community college. And then in Animal Control, his character there is exactly the same. You can't change him physically. He's just as tall, he's just as heavily muscled, he's just as good looking, he's just as intelligent, just as funny. But he used to be a police detective. So he worked in the high-powered world of police detectives fighting crime, but then he got fired, and the only job he could get is at Animal Control. So he's wearing a uniform, and he has a badge, but as far as all the police are concerned, he's just a joke. He's not a real official. He's an Animal Control. So he's like a fish out of water again, where he's better than everybody around him. In his mind, he's still a high-powered detective, and yet here he is rescuing kittens from a tree. And so he plays a similar sort of character, and all the other people in the show are a little bit more what you would expect to find. Except, of course, we're still talking about television. So when you break it down, pretty much everybody is super attractive and super intelligent in their own way. And you're not going to find normal human beings in any office environment looking as good as these people look. But hey, it's television, right? But yeah, they had one season already. It's on Fox. The Fox. It's a television show. It's not even on HBO or anything like that. It's on Fox, and they had one season, and now we're right in the middle of season number 2, just started. But yeah, it's fun, very easy. It's like eating potato chips, 20 minutes an episode. You just munch away, and then it's enjoyable. It's funny. Could be better, could be worse, but yeah, that's Animal Control, starring Joel McHale. Another show that I've been entertaining myself with is quite a bit different from Animal Control. It's called Creature Commandos, and it's animated, so that makes it quite different. And it is a kind of a superhero show. It's from DC, the original. I think DC Comics. There's a DC Comics called Creature Commandos, and it ties in strongly with the Suicide Squad. There were 2 movies, I think, made from the Suicide Squad. So we've got Amanda Waller, who is in charge of like a black ops secret government organization, and what she does is go to the prisons, the worst criminals in all of modern day, and then says to them, okay, we'll let you out of prison, put a bomb in your head so that we can control you, and we're going to send you off to become heroes. And the whole point of the Suicide Squad is, well, we can send you into really dangerous situations because you're criminals, and we don't care if you get killed. And then you can't run away, because if you try to, we trigger the bomb in your head that kills you. So, of course, all the Suicide Squad characters have various powers and abilities and things like that. But now Creature Commandos is related to that world. Amanda Waller is in charge, and it has the same creator. James Gunn was the director for Suicide Squad. James Gunn is also the creator of Creature Commandos. But instead of having a little bit more, like in Suicide Squad, most of them are still humans. But Creature Commandos, it's Amanda Waller going to the prisons, and what she looks for this time are monsters. Because the Suicide Squad didn't really work out that well for them, and now she's even going lower, and she goes into the prisons and gets monsters, like actual supernatural creatures and monsters, and creates a Suicide Squad, but made up of monsters, a Creature Commandos. It's really good. I find it really, really funny, very imaginative. And the first season in particular, I found really enjoyable, because they have all these different monsters, like the Bride of Frankenstein is one of them, sort of a creature of the Black Lagoon, a female creature of the Black Lagoon, like a fish monster that has to live inside a bubble filled with water so she can breathe. And then the Weasel that was in Suicide Squad, the Weasel is part of the Creature Commandos. Turns out that Weasel is a lot tougher than you'd think. It's like, wow, you might wonder, like, how does the Weasel fit in with all these super-powered creatures? But man, when the Weasel starts starts going nuts, and they need the Weasel, man, the Weasel steps up. Got a lot of you don't want to mess with the Weasel, let me tell you. And then there was one really amazing. There's a robot, GI Robot, and the GI Robot was my favorite creature from the Creature Commandos. It's a robot with guns, but it was created back in World War II, when software and AI was not as sophisticated as it is later on. And they basically programmed the GI Robot with a very simple personality, with really one prime directive. It wants and enjoys killing Nazis. And that's all it thinks about. And that's its entire personality. And if it has no Nazis to kill, it basically turns off. It just sort of sits in a chair. And as soon as you go up to it and say, hey, you want to kill some Nazis? And he's like, Nazis, where? Point them. Where are they? Are they Nazis? Like anything he thinks is a Nazi, the guns come out and he just starts killing whatever he thinks is a Nazi, or whatever you tell the robot is a Nazi. And I just found him quite entertaining. But the first season of Creature Commandos really worked because there's so many different creatures, and every one of them has an origin story. And I find that when you're writing any kind of a superhero story, the first one is always the best, because in the first one, you tell the origin story. Like Spider-Man, the origin story is the best story. Peter Parker is a nerdy high school student, and you show that nerdy student being picked on, bullies picking on him. He's in love with the most beautiful girl at his high school, and he can never get the girl because he's a dweeb, he's a nerd. And then, of course, he gets bitten by the radioactive spider, gets all the superpowers, learns how to use the superpowers. Uncle Ben dies, tells him, with great power comes great responsibility. We all know the story, and the origin story has the most detail, the most heart. We can relate to it. But then after you tell the origin story, now you have to tell an ordinary story, and that's a lot harder to do. But in Creature Commandos, every episode has a story, but it also has the origin story of one of the creatures. So the whole first season is just origin story, origin story, origin story. And I find those work really, really well. So I am wondering, how's it going to work in the future when they have no more origin stories to tell? But I think it still continues quite well. So that's James Gunn and the Creature Commandos. Highly recommended if you like animation, if you like superhero, anti-superhero stories. I thought it was a lot of fun. Bride of Frankenstein is an amazing character. Frankenstein, who eventually shows up, is an amazing... Well, Frankenstein's a monster, not Frankenstein himself. And then the Weasel and G.I. Robot. And Rick Flag is in there. Rick Flag is part of the... He's in charge of the Creature Commandos, just like Rick Flag was in charge of the Suicide Squad as well. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Meant for adults. This is not a kids show in any way at all, so you got to be careful about that. This is a R-rated kind of show meant for adults. So keep that in mind if you go to check out Creature Commandos. Another show I wanted to talk about is called Hacks. And there's a new season of Hacks, just came out recently, season number 3. I'd already seen season 1 and season 2 previously. And when I started season 3, to be honest, I felt a little bit left out. I was like, oh, I didn't have the backstory in my head that clearly. So I started watching season 1 or episode 1 of season 3, and then I thought, oh, I want to get up to speed. So I went back and I rewatched all of season 1, all of season 2 before I started season 3, and that was really well worth doing. Season 1 and season 2 are both so strong that they bear rewatching easily. They're very, very entertaining. It's a story about stand-up comedy and comedy writers, and I find those stories to be very, very entertaining. I enjoy them. The idea of comedy and the precision involved in a good joke, like one sentence isn't funny at all, but then you change one word and now the sentence is funny, and you're wondering, like, why? Why is it funny now when it wasn't funny before? There's that kind of precision in stand-up comedy, in good stand-up comedy, and I enjoy that. Got a couple of notes here because I want to get the names right off the bat. So it stars Jean Smart, an older woman, and Hannah Einbinder. She's the younger woman. And Jean Smart plays Deborah Vance, an older comic, like someone who was super, super, super famous, a traveling comic, but now she's older and she has a show in Vegas. So she doesn't travel anymore. She's just got a nightly performance at a big Vegas stage. And so she's like the headliner. And like billions and millions of dollars. She's super rich, that money doesn't even have any meaning for her. And then into her life comes a young comedy writer named Ava. And Ava is played by Hannah Einbinder. So the entire show is based on the relationship between Deborah Vance, an older established comic, with Ava, a young up-and-coming comedy writer. The relationship between the two is what the show is all about. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. It reminds me a lot of The Marvelous Miss Maisel, though it's not nearly as good. I mean, The Marvelous Miss Maisel, again, that's on a pedestal for me, up there with Community and shows like that, a classic, an amazing show. And Hacks is, similar to that, but not as good. But it reminds me of that. The one problem with Hacks for me is that, to be honest, whenever they're on stage performing or talking about comedy, none of it is ever funny. And that seemed kind of weird to me. Deborah Vance is supposed to be one of the most famous stand-up comics, but whenever they show her routine on stage, it doesn't ever strike me as funny. Like, she's supposed to be one of the funniest women on the planet, but nothing she says or does ever seems particularly funny to me. And in The Marvelous Miss Maisel, the script, the show, the characters are all really, really funny. And then when the character, Marvelous Miss Maisel, gets up on stage and performs her stand-up routines, it's also really, really funny. So the normal script of the show is funny, and the stand-up is funny. But I find in Hacks, the show is funny, but when Deborah Vance goes on stage to perform her own material or the material written by the up-and-comer Ava, none of it ever seems particularly funny to me. It's broad and it's vulgar, and people laugh, but it didn't seem funny to me at all. So that seemed like a bit of a weakness to me. And there was something else a little bit weird about this show. I'm not entirely sure what is going on here. I guess I misjudged it, because you've got Deborah Vance, the older woman. I thought she was being presented as having common sense. And then we've got the young comedy writer, Ava. She came into her world spouting a lot of liberal, left-wing, woke stuff, because a lot of Deborah's comedy was based on like stereotypes. That comedy back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, you could just say anything you wanted. Nobody got offended. It was just open season on whatever you wanted to make jokes about, which I'm perfectly fine with. It's just now everybody is so super sensitive about everything. Everybody gets canceled. Everybody gets in trouble. And then to me, it looked like Ava was coming from the world of cancel culture, and I thought she was supposed to be the ridiculous one. That Deborah Vance, her perspective was based in common sense, and this young comedy writer came into her world and said, "Oh, you can't say that. No, oh, you can't use that word. Oh, no, the environment, we have to do this, we have to do that. That's cultural appropriation." So I thought the young writer was being presented as being completely ridiculous with all of her cancel culture stuff. But when you watch the show, you actually end up with Deborah Vance, the main comic, actually apologizing now. She has to go on apology tours. So it was like the young comedy writer was being presented as being right, like she was correct, because Deborah Vance went to a university campus and made a couple of off-color jokes, and she was banned from the university. And she had to sit down in front of a tribunal of students. Like, there was an actual tribunal where she was put on trial, and she had to sit on stage and apologize. I mean, it reminded me of what you see from Maoist China, where people were put on trial for being intellectuals, for being traitors to the revolution, and they had to grovel and apologize and apologize and apologize. And that's what was happening in Hacks. And I thought, Did I misread this whole thing? Like, why in the world is she apologizing to these ridiculous students and their sensitivities? And this whole tribunal to me seemed like a joke. So I thought Hacks was making fun of that. And I kept expecting Deborah Vance to stand up for herself and say, come on, give it a rest. Like, just relax a little bit. It's comedy, and I'm not going to apologize for what I said. And if you want to kick me off your campus, go ahead, kick me off. Cancel all my shows. What do I care? I'm a multi-millionaire. But the way the show played it, she was serious. She really was apologizing. And then she started changing the way she behaved. And I was like, what? What? It made no sense to me at all. Anyway. That was a weird, that all happened in season 3. Season 1 and season 2, it always seemed to me like Deborah Vance was in the right, and then the young comedy writer Ava was presented as being a little bit ridiculous with all of her woke cancel culture sensitivities. But in season 3, the cancel culture actually won, and Deborah Vance felt embarrassed about her behavior and started apologizing all the time. It felt really weird to me. It felt like a new season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, where every episode was Larry David realizing the error of his ways and going around apologizing to everyone and trying to be a better human being. And that would make no sense at all in the world of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And all of this in Hacks was kind of the same thing. And I felt really weird to me in season 3 because, I mean, Deborah Vance is presented as a character who's a little bit broad, a little bit loud, a little bit vulgar and insensitive. She doesn't put up with fools. She's a tough, she's a tough old broad, basically. And a lot of people get angry with her. And I kind of admired this because she was a comic. That's all she cared about, comedy. That was her life, that was her passion. It's the only thing she cared about. But then she did get married, and she did have a daughter, but she was not a traditional wife or mother because that's not where her passion lay. So even with her daughter, she would bring the daughter with her on tour. So the daughter grew up in comedy clubs, hanging out in the green room, having a very unusual lifestyle because Deborah Vance was all about comedy. She wasn't about being a mother. And I like that. I kind of admire that. I admire people of passion. I remember really admiring, for example, Jerry Seinfeld, because in all the interviews I've seen with him, he's the same. He does not suffer fools. He's not going to bend to your ridiculous sensitivities and ideas. And all he cares about is comedy. That's it. And as he's talked about a lot of times, he's very glad his show Seinfeld was famous and popular, and he made hundreds of millions of dollars. Obviously he's happy about that. Why not? But he said many times that he didn't care. He did not care whether Seinfeld was successful or not. All he cared about was, is it funny or not funny? That's all. And he said, if the show failed, if Seinfeld was canceled, and he had to spend the rest of his life just scraping his way financially and living in comedy clubs, he said he would be just as happy. He doesn't care. All he cares about is hanging out with other comics, talking about comedy, writing jokes, polishing the joke, making it better and better. That's all he cares about is comedy. And he actually made a documentary that followed him doing this. Oh yeah, it was called I'm Telling You for the Last Time, which I found really fascinating because the show is a documentary and it follows Jerry as he writes a big special. So he's trying to build up a brand new 2-hour-long comedy special, and he goes on tour to all these small comedy clubs, and he's trying out new material and writing new jokes and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. And then the whole show builds up to him putting together a 2-hour special, going on stage and performing it in front of a huge audience. And I love that documentary. and it shows him as a passionate comedy comedian. And I mean, if you tell me Jerry Seinfeld's style of comedy is not for you, again, I'm not going to argue with you. I noticed when he goes on like late night talk shows as a guest, he regurgitates the same bits over and over and over. So he's not really a very original comic. He's more of an observational comic, and he will take a bit and drive it into the ground. He just tells the same bit over and over and over for years and years and years. He's not out there like grinding out new equipment. He's not an improv comedian. He's not writing new, fresh material all the time. And I get that. But I'd still enjoy what he does because of his passion for comedy. And in Hacks, the main character, Deborah Vance, is the same way. And in season 3, everybody yells at her all the time. Her daughter just yells at her and criticizes her over episode after episode. You were a terrible mother. You did this to me. You didn't come to my school plays. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. You forgot about me. You ignore me. You're a terrible mother. You're a terrible mother. You're an awful person. Just never ended. And then she got divorced, of course, because of her passion for comedy. Her husband had an affair with her sister and actually married her sister. And her husband and her sister hate Deborah Vance as well and just yell at her and criticize her and criticize. And this just got way too much for me. Everybody was so angry with her for being such a horrible, terrible person. And then as season 3 went along, they actually convinced her. And then Deborah Vance started apologizing to everybody about everything she ever did and apologizing for the kind of person she was. And I was really disappointed in that because I wanted Deborah Vance to stand her ground. And like, you can yell at me all you want for being a terrible mother. I'm an amazing comedian. I care about comedy. Your childhood was absolutely fine. Like, give it a rest. Quit blaming me for your life. I didn't screw up your life. You did. You had advantages that no other child ever has because you were the daughter of a famous multi-million-dollar comic. So just stop yelling at me. Quit blaming me for how your life turned out. Take responsibility for your own life. But in season 3, it felt like she was beaten to the ground and defeated, and she started going on an apology tour, apologizing to ridiculous woke university students, apologizing to her sister, apologizing to her daughter, apologizing to her coworkers, to her staff. And I got tired of it after a while. I was like, quit apologizing. These people yelling at you, yell back. Just tell them to get over it already. So, I don't know. I was a little bit frustrated with season 3. I thought people were picking on poor Deborah Vance too much. And she actually listened to the people criticizing her. When I thought, I really enjoyed her as a character when she didn't worry about the niceties of polite society. I like that. Like Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm, I like that world. And I often wish I could be like that, where I could just go through life and just say everything that's on my mind, the honest, unvarnished truth all the time. And I guess if you have a passion for one thing, you can get away with it because you don't care about anything else. Or if you're a multi-millionaire, you can get away with it because nobody can hurt you as a multi-millionaire. You can just do whatever you want. Anyway. So I enjoy watching someone like Deborah Vance who can just behave in any way she likes. Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm. And normally they're right. I find Larry David is usually correct. It's everyone around him who gets angry with him. They're the ones that are ridiculous in my eyes. But anyway, that's the show Hacks. Seasons 1, seasons 2, excellent. Season 3, also good. But like I said, I had a few problems with the writing of season 3. I have a lot of other shows I could talk about, but I'm going to set some of them aside for the next podcast. I have one more show I wanted to bring up because it's a little bit more recent in my mind. Shogun, based on James Clavell's novel, of course. And I think it was turned into a movie or TV show already in the past, right? I have a memory of Shogun from the past. And I've read the book. I enjoyed the show very much with reservations because I have a theme in my life, something I think about all the time because of the life I've led, I guess, is how difficult it is to truly communicate across a language barrier, across a cultural barrier, where in most TV shows, most movies, they don't really give that enough weight. Where you get people talking about like war and peace and how we should all learn to get along. You get that a lot on YouTube with travelers. They come out with the constant platitudes about how, oh, when they travel the world, they learn that we're all the same. We're all the same, and there shouldn't be any war because we're all the same. And my perspective from my time overseas is the exact opposite. When I travel to certain countries around the world, I'm amazed that we are not at war all the time. Because, again, I'm talking about decades ago, maybe before we had all this technology, but you go to a country where you don't speak the language, they don't speak your language, just go to the train station and try to book a train ticket. I remember this like in China when I tried to do this. That will almost be the death of you. Like walk into a train station in China back in the 90s or the 80s, whenever, and try to buy a train ticket. You'll want to shoot yourself by the end of it because you can't communicate. Nothing is in English. You can't figure out anything, and you're dealing with a culture and an environment that you don't understand. It's hard. Like being overseas in another culture where there's a language barrier and a culture barrier, it's really, really tough. And that's simple things. Trying to book a bus ticket or a train ticket, getting something to eat at a local restaurant, going to a hotel and trying to get a room, asking for directions to where the local temple is that you want to see as a tourist. All of that is impossible to do. And if that is so difficult, imagine at the level of diplomacy, at the level of trade negotiations, at the level of war, and that sort of thing. If I can't even buy a bus ticket, how in the world are you going to do anything else with that country, right? So my idea is not that I'm surprised that countries go to war. I'm surprised that there aren't more wars. I'm amazed that we're not all at war all the time. It's kind of a miracle because communication is so hard. And at the beginning of Shogun, you see a lot of that, and I really enjoyed the opening. It kind of fell apart a little bit later on, but at the beginning, the whole story of Shogun, of course, is that we've got a ship back in, I don't know, the 1400s, the 1500s in Japan, and you've got I think they're British, British sailors, perhaps on a British ship. And we don't really get a lot of their backstory, but they've obviously gone through some storms. Most of the captain is dead, the senior staff are all dead, and we just have some sailors that are barely alive on this British ship, and it happens to float to shore in Japan at the time of the Shogun, feuding warlords. Japan has been divided up into different districts, and there was one head warlord with a bunch of warlords under him, and everybody's fighting everyone else. So it's the time of the samurai and the shogun, that kind of feudal Japan. But of course, Japan at that time, from a European perspective, highly civilized in terms of the the cities, the architecture, the food, the language, the art, the armor, the swords. I mean, it was a highly, highly sophisticated civilization. And yet, of course, you've got this British sailors who see the Japanese as savages. And of course, the Europeans manage to maintain this attitude because they have cannons. Their military stuff is a step above, and they can go around the world and blast everybody with their cannons and take over all these countries, and they view all the local people as barbarians. But of course, from the Japanese point of view, when this ship came to shore and the British sailors came out of the ship, from the Japanese point of view, these British men were less than animals to them. They were barbarians. Because, you know, their cultures were so far apart, each completely misunderstanding the other. And I guess at that time, the British didn't bathe. They said something in the show about how they thought if you take a lot of baths, you'll get sick and you'll die. So the British basically don't take baths, and they stink. So when they come out of the boat, the Japanese are all like, "Oh man, you guys stink," and they're dressed in rags. And the Japanese, of course, are bathing every day. They're super clean, and they got amazing clothing and their armor, and they're having tea in Japan is a ceremony that can take 10 hours, where you have to, like, everything has to be perfect. Everything is beautiful. The gardens and the Zen sand lots, the whole opening sequence to the show Shogun is pretty amazing, because they show a European ship sailing, but it's sailing through a desert of sand, and the sand has been raked to look beautiful, like Japanese Zen gardens with the bonsai trees, the whole idea of meditation and raking the sand, making beautiful patterns, all of that, you know, those parts of the Japanese culture. So it's an amazing, and then the tea ceremony, where a woman, a high art form for the women, was knowing how to prepare and serve tea perfectly, where the position of everything has to be so exact, the body position and the hand movements and the elegance, and it's an art form. And of course the British are just like, "Where's the beer?" You know, getting drunk, and then their stinky, smelly clothing. But at the same time, there was a British civilization as well, and they saw the Japanese as primitive barbarians, and they looked at each other across this insurmountable language barrier. And right at the very beginning, they could have gotten along. There's an amazing scene for me at the very beginning where the Japanese, of course, board the ship with all their weapons, because they don't know if these are enemies or friends, and they find these British guys who are starving to death and they can barely walk, and they take all the British and throw them into a hole in the ground as a prison. You know, they're prisoners of the Japanese. And then, if they had had a translator, if one of them could speak the other's language, things probably would have gone smoothly. But because they couldn't understand each other, they ended up treating each other as enemies. So there's a sequence where, I can't remember exactly the step-by-step, but the Japanese, with their armor and their swords and everything, they come to the hole in the ground and they shout down to the British guys, like, "Who is your leader? We would like to have a discussion with you about, so one of you, please choose a leader and have that person come up out of the hole, and we'll talk and then figure out what's going on." But the British don't know what they're saying. And then the British are scared to come out of the hole, so they start shouting up to them in English. So, like, "Who are you? We are members of the British, this, that, and you can't keep us in this prison, and what's going on?" But from the Japanese point of view, it looks like they're refusing. The Japanese say, "Okay, one of you come up out and let's have a talk." But it looks to them like the British are saying, "No, we're not coming up there." And now they start shouting at each other and arguing and getting angry. And then eventually the Japanese just jump down in the hole and beat the crap out of the British and drag one out and execute him. And they're all shouting at each other in different languages and nobody can understand. So you've got this huge, like this moment where two civilizations are meeting and they could have met as friends, but because of the language barrier, they just end up being enemies and they just kill each other and fight with each other, and the whole thing is a disaster. So anyway, that kind of appealed to me because I tend to have lived in that world a little bit, and I know how important language is and how you can't make assumptions about what's happening around you, because even in the modern world, 90% of what I see happening around me in Sumatra or even here in Malaysia, I don't know what's going on. I don't really understand it. I have trouble going into a restaurant and ordering a bowl of noodles. So, yeah, language barrier, cultural communication, I find is a very interesting topic for me. And then, of course, the whole point in Shogun, the book, is that one of these sailors, the most intelligent of the bunch, he adopts Japanese culture. He learns, I thought he would become fluent in Japanese because I thought that was part of the story, but he learns a little bit of Japanese. He starts wearing Japanese clothes. He introduces the British cannon tactics for warfare. He starts rising the ranks of the Japanese. He starts getting titles, and then he becomes part of the local Japanese culture. And that is the main story of Shogun. And I find that very interesting because later on in the show, this man, our hero, who almost assimilates into Japanese culture, he eventually gets to be reunited with his original shipmates, the British shipmates. And now to him, he sees them and he was so looking forward to it. It's like, oh, I want to be reunited with my shipmates and it'd be so great to be with them again and da-da-da-da-da. And then he does see them, and now from his Japanese point of view, to him they look like animals. It's like he gets near them, it's like, oh man, you guys, you stink. I mean, and they're drunk and they're behaving badly and they're uneducated, and so now he's actually becoming Japanese and he's seeing the British sailors from the Japanese perspective, what he looked like to them when he first arrived. And that I find that a fascinating story to tell. And there are going to be new seasons. I mean, in terms of production value, acting, music, cinematography, top notch across the board. Shogun really is amazing. It's an amazing show to watch. So yeah, Planet Doug, highly recommended. Shogun, the new series. Well, as always, I have a lot more I could talk about. I have a lot of things on my mind almost all the time. And yeah, but I think I will bring this podcast to a close just now. I have to say, though, that I've managed to make my life a little bit more complicated with the introduction of the Planet Doug Patreon. And my brain is still kind of trying to make an adjustment here, because I originally started recording these podcasts because I enjoy this sort of freewheeling discussion about random topics, but it's also more in the moment and more immediate than a normal travel video, which might be a couple weeks old or something like that. I like to be able to communicate in more real time. So that's how these Planet Doug daily journals or podcasts developed. But now that I have the Planet Doug Patreon, I'm sort of pitching that as the same, where I can be posting updates in real time, my thoughts in real time. If I watch a YouTube video, I can put a link onto Patreon and write about it, and just sort of pepper the Patreon feed with random thoughts and ideas and things like this. So now I do find that if I have something I want to talk about, I stop for a minute and go, oh, so is this for a podcast, or do I put this on Patreon now, or do I duplicate it and I mention it briefly on Patreon and then I talk about it at length on the podcast? Exactly what is the relationship now between the Planet Doug main channel, the Planet Doug behind the scenes channel, these podcasts, and Patreon? So I'm still working out the kinks there mentally. And in general, I think my ideas for Patreon might have been a little bit misguided. I'm still figuring that out. Where when I was creating the Planet Doug Patreon, I designed it to have a lot of content and a variety of content, and most of it being posted in real time, like a strong social media kind of platform where I can communicate directly with Planet Doug subscribers in more immediacy. But that's how I view Patreon. But it seems to me when I'm using it now and dealing with people who sign up for the Planet Doug Patreon, they don't see it that way. They don't see Patreon as a place to go to in order to communicate with me in real time. They have a different idea of what it is all about. So maybe all the effort and all the thought that I put into sort of a social media element is really not necessary at all. And when people sign up for the Planet Doug Patreon, there is the possibility of filling out a welcome survey. I don't design it. I don't put it together. I've got nothing to do with it. This is something that Patreon does automatically, but I do get to see the answers. And when people fill out the welcome survey and they talk about, well, what are their expectations from this Patreon? What would they like to see? They generally talk about updates. That's what they're most interested in. They're most interested in supporting the Planet Doug YouTube channel financially so that I can continue to travel and continue to make movies or make videos. That's the main reason they signed up for the Patreon. But second to that would be more like just casual updates. Where I am, what I'm doing, where I'm going next. Just that sort of thing. And they don't need me to be on Patreon talking about the latest movie that I watched or the TV show that I enjoyed or a YouTube travelers that I'm following. They don't seem to be looking at Patreon in that way. I think they want Patreon to be about me. So if I'm traveling, what am I eating? What am I drinking? What am I seeing? Where am I staying? How am I traveling? Where am I going next? That sort of thing. They would appreciate a constant flow of travel updates about where I am, the country I'm in, the place I'm in, the people I'm meeting, and what I'm doing and where I'm going next. I think that's what they would appreciate getting from Patreon. All the other stuff that I was thinking about, not so much. So maybe over time, a division will occur where a lot of my just random thoughts, as you heard in this podcast, will be reserved for the Planet Doug podcast on the Planet Doug Behind the Scenes channel. And then Patreon will just sort of drift more into a role of trip updates, travel updates. There could be pictures and audio files and video files, but more focused on actual traveling. So a closer connection between YouTube and Patreon. And then these podcasts are a little bit more of an outlier where I can talk about things at length and more general sorts of topics. So we'll see how it goes over time. I'm in Malaysia right now, as I talked about. I'm in Kuala Lumpur, and I will be going back to Sumatra because my bicycle is there, and my plan is to finally, with my next visa, go back and ride my bicycle as much as I can around Sumatra and then kind of get that out of my system. And as I'm doing that, I think I will get a much better idea of how Planet Doug, the Planet Doug YouTube channel and the Patreon and the podcast kind of fit together, because I will be traveling daily, going to a lot of new places, and then I think a rhythm should develop. Right now I'm in more of a static environment, a static state of mind. So then it's hard to kind of design things from a static point of view. So once I start moving, then I think things will make more sense. I'm making Planet Doug videos on a regular basis and then supporting that with Patreon updates. and then occasionally sitting down and doing a podcast. I think things will start to will start to make more sense once I start moving, rather than just sitting here in one place getting organized. So that is it. I'm going to shut down, start the day. I'm very glad to be able to stay in my double room. I don't have to spend time today moving to a new room. But now I'm actually very, very hungry. Yeah, it's getting later in the day, quite a bit later, and it's time to go out, find something to eat. And I'll see you in the next video, in the next Patreon post, and in the next Planet Doug podcast. See you then.